Detroit with...
Well, if everyone could take their seats, we'll get started this morning. Let me welcome you all to the Woodrow Wilson Center, and welcome to those of you watching on the web. Special welcome to, I believe, the ambassadors from Brazil and Bolivia are here, and a number of other senior officials from key embassies. I'm Kent Hughes. I run a program here at the Wilson Center, Science, Technology, America, and the Global Economy. Before I introduce our moderator, let me just say a word or two about the Wilson Center for those of you that are new to us. This is the living memorial to Woodrow Wilson. Wilson was the only American president to have had a PhD. He actually was quite a distinguished political scientist in his day, went on to be president of Princeton before getting into politics. When Congress established this living memorial in 1968, he gave the charge to the center was to bring both sides of Wilson's life together. So we try to bring the best thinkers in the country thinking about policy together with the policymakers in the broader Washington policy community. We over the course of a year, will have some 700 meetings, and we host 150 scholars, some from the academic world, some who really are coming from the world of policy to reflect on what they've seen and what they've done. Well, this morning's session on President Obama's first 100 days, and some of you have asked why we're doing this on day 86. I got a call from a journalist a couple days ago, and I explained that looking at the world as an economist, on a weighted average, Obama is well past 100 days. And, of course, I also suggested the Wilson Center always tries to stay ahead of the curve. Today's session is jointly sponsored by the Boston University Washington Center and the Center on Communications at Boston University. And it's my pleasure now to introduce today's moderator, Linda Killian. Linda, raise your hand. I guess there's probably obvious who Linda is. Linda directs the Boston University Washington Center. She founded the Boston University Washington Journalism Center in 2000, and she also serves as a professor of journalism in that program. And then she directs the overall Washington Center, as I said. And if that is not enough, she is a columnist for Politico.com. She's written for a host of papers from the Washington Post to the Los Angeles Times. As a native Oregonian, I was particularly thrilled to find that early in her career she wrote for the Portland Oregonian. She also has a scholarly side. She has degrees from BU and Harvard. She has an outstanding book to her credit, The Freshman, What Happened to the Republican Revolution. And it is our particular pleasure here that she is also a senior scholar at the Wilson Center. Linda, the program is yours.
Thank you so much, Kent. That was a very generous introduction. Thank you. We're really delighted to work with Kent, who teaches at the Boston University Washington Center. And it's been a joy for me to have a relationship with him these past couple of years, a professional relationship. I want to just acknowledge the help the Wilson Center gave, and Susan Nugent, I don't know where she is, in helping to arrange this. Thank you so much. And I want to also acknowledge my students, if I can just, you want to raise your hand, and my students, VU students are here. And there are some alumni here. I got to speak with one in the ladies' room. Welcome to the VU alumni. If I can just do a public service announcement here. We're looking for internships for the summer for our VU students. So if you're an alum and you have an internship to offer, come find me after the session, and we'll talk some business. I want to introduce our panel. I encourage you to take a bio. We have a detailed bio in the back. They have all very distinguished and illustrious careers, and I'm going to be kind of brief in their introduction because I know they have such interesting things to say. I want to get into that. But starting at, I guess, your left, to my right, at the end is Jerry Seib, who is the assistant managing editor and executive Washington editor of the Wall Street Journal. who has covered every kind of sort of government and politics, and who now writes the paper's Capital Journal column. Next to him is Ken Walsh, who has covered the White House for U.S. News and World Report for more than 20 years. And I would like to just say that both of them, 8 years ago, in the first year that I started the Washington Journalism Center, we did a panel on the first 100 days of the Bush administration, and both of them participated in that panel.
And we look exactly the same as we did.
So I really appreciate them being back. They were brilliant then. I know they're going to be brilliant today. And it was interesting, the Bush administration didn't turn out quite like we thought it would at the end of the first 100 days. So we'll see about the Obama administration. But anyway, next to me is Michael Kazin, professor of history at Georgetown University, who is currently working on a book on the American left and has written a number of books. And next to him, we're honored that he came down, Tom Fiedler, dean of the Boston University College of Communication and former executive editor of the Miami Herald and a former political writer, and has covered politics over the years. So thank you for coming, Dean Fiedler. Any of you who have seen the adorable pictures of the new White House dog Bo? I'm a big dog person, as my students know, so I'm into the White House dog. Pulling President Obama around the White House lawn may have wondered who was leading who. Portuguese water dogs are a particularly high-spirited breed, especially young puppies, so it's no comment on the president's leadership. But it may be an apt metaphor for the national and world events Barack Obama has been forced to wrestle with since taking office 86 days ago. Just to recap briefly the administration's greatest hits so far. Barack Obama began his administration with a heady, historic, tear-inducing inauguration day that drew record-breaking crowds to Washington. In one of his first acts, he ordered the closing of Guantanamo Bay within a year, although there have been few details about how he intends to accomplish that. He's reached out and met with Republican leaders, invited them to watch the Super Bowl at the White House, but they would probably say not to actually be involved in the shaping of policy. He has moved on a number of issues near and dear to the hearts of the Democratic faithful, including signing a Fair Pay Act and issuing executive orders to help unions. In early February, he named a Republican to be his Commerce Secretary after his first choice, Bill Richardson, withdrew because of a grand jury investigation. 2 weeks later, the Republican, Judd Gregg, withdrew his name from consideration for the job. That was one of several what you might call appointment hiccups for President Obama. He established the Economic Recovery Board. He has held several presidential press conferences and made a major address to Congress. He took to the road to sell his stimulus plan. He made his first foreign trip as president to Canada, sort of a foreign trip with training wheels. It was followed by a major trip to Europe for the G20 and a quick stop in Iraq. He unveiled the Homeowner Affordability and Stability Plan. He outlined a plan for troop reductions in Iraq. He hosted the Japanese and British prime ministers in separate visits. He reversed the ban on the use of stem cells in medical research. He held a White House forum on health reform and another on a fiscal responsibility summit. He worked with Congress to craft and then signed a $787 billion stimulus plan, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. He relaxed travel restrictions to Cuba. Today he is traveling to Mexico to meet with Mexican President Felipe Calderon and discuss how the U.S. can help in the drug war, and then on to the Summit of the Americas. He has hosted the Grateful Dead, Stevie Wonder, and Earth, Wind, and Fire at the White House, and has named the actor who played Kumar to a post in his administration. Jerry Seib, is the president overreaching, or is he just ambitious?
Well, Linda, I think that is the question that hangs over all of this, I think, right now. And as your introductory remarks suggest, it's easy to sort of get numb to all of this, to forget how much has happened and how fast. It feels more like 1,000 days than 100 days. And this actually goes back to the campaign. I keep reminding people that don't forget that, the feel of the campaign and what a historic event that was. And from my point of view, my baptism in Washington came in the 1980 campaign that elected Ronald Reagan, and the introduction of the Reagan Revolution into policy here. And I thought and was right all the years since then that I'd never see anything like that again, and that was true up until now. And now this feels like that, only maybe even on steroids, because the Reagan tax cuts, which and his budget, which were the signal economic initiatives of the Reagan era, got passed in August of 1981, and that seemed revolutionary. Well, we're now in April, and everything that has been described by Linda has already happened. You have a stimulus bill, you have a bank bailout plan, and oh, by the way, there's a rescue plan for GM and Chrysler, which if it had happened at any other time would have been a momentous event that we would all be chewing over endlessly, and it's almost a footnote compared to everything else. So the context here is important. The breadth is really sweeping. The question I think that you asked, Linda, is the right one. Do people think this is a burst of activism that is necessary, or is it overreach? Is it ambition, or is it too much, too fast? And I think right now the administration can look at some signals and say that while there's concern on that, that there's generally a feeling that that it's necessary and it's not overreach yet. There were two polls in the last few weeks. Both asked a very similar question, one by Quinnipiac University, one by CBS and the New York Times, and they found very similar answers, so it tells you that in the polling, in the science of polling, it's probably about right. Basically, they both asked, is he trying to do too much or the right amount of stuff? And the Times found 38% said too much and 55% said about right. 4% said too little. I'd like to talk to those people myself. And Quinnipiac had very similar numbers. But there was an earlier kind of more cautionary note. A couple of weeks earlier, CNN asked the same essential question and found that 55% of those they surveyed said they think he's done more than he should have, and 43% said not. So there's at least sort of an undercurrent of concern out there that, well, maybe this is too much to chew all at once. Maybe this is more than we can digest. And I think the best indication that the White House is at least cognizant of that danger and a little worried about it came just a couple of days ago with the speech that the President gave at Georgetown University, which I encourage you all to go back and read. I'm writing a column about it for tomorrow because it's the best explanation, 45 minutes long, very serious, best explanation of how all this is supposed to fit together into a kind of a unified theory of the universe. And it was a speech delivered, I think, in large measure because the White House knows that it needs for the public and for Congress to see that all this fits together somehow, that it's not just 1,000 things done for the sake of doing 1,000 things. And whether the President is persuasive on that or not, it will tell you a lot about whether the health care plan will get through, whether something will happen on global warming, and, oh, by the way, whether Congress might, in the end, agree to fork over some more money for bank bailouts in the fall, which it may very well be asked to do.
Thanks, Jerry. I think I want to talk about some of the specifics in that speech. But first, Ken Walsh, this president is facing a lot of national problems. And with only two other Democratic presidents in the last 40 years, there is a lot of pent-up desire on the part of Democrats to advance their agenda. How does this president compare with Jimmy Carter, who you covered, or Bill Clinton in their first months in office, or any other presidents that you've covered?
Well, right. Well, I don't quite go back as far as Carter, but to Ronald Reagan.
Sorry.
But if you look at the Democratic presidents in parallels, I was just talking to some White House folks about this exact thing yesterday, and it's interesting because they say one of the advantages that Barack Obama has is that he has a very deep bench. When Bill Clinton took office, the only people he could draw on for his government were people from the Carter administration, in the recent past, and that was generally considered an unsuccessful presidency. Now you see all the people that Barack Obama has put in his government from the Clinton 8 years, which policy-wise and in terms of the economy and so on, was considered a successful time. So that's one big advantage he has. So he has not made a lot of the mistakes rookie mistakes that presidents often make in the beginning. Remember when Clinton took over, it was very vivid. We just came back from the inauguration, meeting the press corps, and we found that the upper press office was closed. And this caused a huge furor because this is the area we all went to talk to the press secretary, and we couldn't get there. First time any of us had ever seen that happen. So we started calling it the no-fly zone. And for the first briefings of George Stephanopoulos, that's all we wanted to talk about. The budget, foreign policy, all that stuff was secondary. Now, that's a part of the statement on us and our myopia in the press corps, but still, for some reporters, it was a matter of survival. You couldn't get to the press corps to the press secretary to get your questions answered. But that's something that a president should understand. You know, you don't slap the media in the face the first day, the first hour. The Obama administration has not done that. They have been actually remarkably. Linda talked about some of the missteps on cabinet appointments, but by and large, these people do know what they're doing, and I think at least in how to run the government. You know, you've had Rahm Emanuel, the White House chief of staff, was instrumental in the Clinton administration. Of course, Hillary Clinton is there. It's full of Clinton administration people. But I say that just as a preface because it shows that these people do have a lot of strength and experience, and which President Clinton didn't have and President Carter didn't have. So that's one advantage. But I think more broadly, Jerry described it as overreaching, or ambition versus overreaching. Ambitious versus overreaching agenda. I see it also in terms of transformational versus transitional. It's sort of another way of looking at that, but is it a transformational presidency? Is it, and it does appear to be, it has the feel of that because of a lot of the issues that he's taking on very rapidly. I mean, we all, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, look at the parallels to Franklin Roosevelt, where the 100-day concept came into play. Presidents generally don't like that because they feel it's an artificial yardstick, but we all go with it anyway in analyzing a presidency. But basically, as Jerry said, it is moving very rapidly toward activist government, big government, all these incredible amounts of money that they're spending that caused a lot of these tax protests yesterday that you've noticed. But I think the things that strike me, just in concluding the opening remarks here, is a couple of things. This is the fifth president I've covered. Barack Obama is almost preternaturally confident, without a lot of the arrogance that often seeps into a president. Now, maybe we don't see the arrogance. Maybe it's just not evident publicly. But President Bush. All the presidents I've covered were very confident people. You really have to be to run for this office. But Barack Obama had a natural transition to being president. For a guy with as little experience as he had, it's always striking to me that he sees himself as in the company of Washington and Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt and Jefferson. That's Mount Rushmore. And it's quite remarkable he doesn't seem to be he seems to be unflappable, doesn't seem to be bothered by these decisions he's made. Even the pirate incident, which a lot of us have covered in the last week, didn't seem to bother him. Now, if he had failed, that's where it would be a big issue. But it worked. And quite a remarkable story. Probably going to see it on a television docudrama on a TV near you. But it was a case where he actually, because of his order, caused the deaths of 3 teenage pirates. But, and that's generally something that a president takes very seriously, causing, people in harm's way, to even the enemy, to be killed. But apparently didn't set him back at all. It wasn't an emotional reaction. And then finally, that's one big thing about Barack Obama. He does not appear to be a very emotional kind of guy. Some people criticize him that he's too dispassionate, that he doesn't seem to be fired up about anything. He's too disciplined and too maintain an even strain. But at this point, the White House sees that as a big advantage.
Thanks, Ken. Now, I know, Michael Kazin, you wanted to touch on that idea of a transitional versus a transformational president, and also obvious comparisons have been made with Franklin Roosevelt and the situation he faced when he took office and his style. Barack Obama has studied presidents who he considers to have been successful. Do you think those comparisons are apt? And also, where does this 100 days benchmark come from? You were telling me something interesting about that it precedes Roosevelt.
Thanks, Linda. One of the nice things about being a historian is, I've covered every president since Washington. First of all, what you mentioned about the 100 days, it's kind of ironic. The concept of 100 days comes from Napoleon's last campaign, where he fled exile in Elba and tried to take power again in France and was stopped after about 111 days, actually, by the combined armies of various monarchies in British and Russian. And the actual term was coined by the prefect of Paris, a clergyman who was welcoming King Louis XVIII, I think it was, back to Paris. So it's kind of like Rush Limbaugh welcoming George W. Bush back to Washington or something. But I don't think that's probably going to happen. But about the transformational question, I think it's certainly possible that, of course, historians like to say too soon to tell, and that's obviously true. But it's really possible that Obama will be someone that later we can put in the company of Jefferson and Jackson and Lincoln and FDR and Reagan. And why have I picked those names? Well, in each of those 5 cases, these are presidents who followed a president who was perceived widely to have been inept, self-defeating, to be the leader of a political coalition which was in decline. And in each case, all these presidents did move fairly quickly. Jefferson not as quickly. The government was pretty tiny at the time. There wasn't that much he could do. But the other presidents did leave their mark on policy pretty quickly and were transformational presidents in different ways. And I think the idea of is he moving too quickly, is Obama moving too quickly, not quickly enough, it's not a quantitative question so much. But presidents in this situation who have an opportunity to be transformational really have to try to accomplish a lot very quickly. They're elected in large part because people do want a big change. And that's certainly that's the only way to understand why Barack Obama, who 4 years before he was elected was a first-term senator, was still running for the Senate, had just been elected to the Senate from Illinois, why he was able to win a pretty easy victory last November. So in that sense, I think Obama does have a chance to be transformational. Can he be? Well, that's, of course, a question about what political forces are on his side or arrayed against him. How much patience Americans have with him fixing the economy, and so forth. Just a couple words about the comparison to FDR. What's interesting is that FDR, who we think about as being the great liberal president, the founder of modern liberalism, was actually a more conservative figure in many ways at the beginning of his administration than Obama is today. People often forget that during his 32 campaign, FDR accused his opponent, Herbert Hoover, of spending too much money, of getting the budget out of balance. And Roosevelt knew he had to spend some money when he got into office, and under his leadership, Congress did appropriate money to set up the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Public Works Administration, created some federal jobs. But at the same time, he was trying to save money wherever he could. He bailed out the banks, but he didn't want to spend much money on that. And Roosevelt really believed that all this should be temporary, that the stimulus, if you can call it that, it wasn't called that at the time, but the job creation should be temporary. He really was, in some ways, still a 19th century liberal rather than a 20th century liberal. He didn't want the government to be that big. And as the Depression lasted and as there was pressure on him and on Democrats from below, from old age movement, from Huey Long, Father Coughlin, communists and socialists, unionists, that's when the New Deal became the creation of the instrument to create a larger welfare state in America, to protect the security of citizens that we think of it as now. But when in the first 100 days, Roosevelt was basically trying to shore up the economy, to make people feel more secure. And in some ways, his ideology was quite a bit more conservative than Obama's is today.
Thank you. Tom Fiedler, Barack Obama has tremendous charisma, obviously, and connects well with the American people, and did so in the campaign and used new and various means of communication. From my perspective, the press was quite enamored with Barack Obama in the campaign. How has the press treated him since he's become president, and how has he treated the press?
Interesting. Can I just, for one moment, I want to just say parochial point that thank you for including me in this panel. And I want to remind everybody that Boston University feels very comfortable in Washington, because all of you who are hockey fans, and I'm sure the room is just full of you, will know that it was here in Washington where Boston University won the Frozen Four, the national championship of hockey. We have no football team, so hockey has to do it for us, and it does. So thanks for including me here. This it's an interesting question. And Michael, when you use the word about a transformational presidency, raise that question and the whole idea about Mount Rushmore and so forth, I think we all recognize that this already is an historic presidency because of who Barack Obama is, what he personally has brought to the White House and to our history. But I have to wonder if whether the measures that we apply to look back to the first 100 days of Roosevelt's administration, or to compare what Obama is doing perhaps to the Reagan administration. I was here. I covered the Carter White House, so I started here in 1977 and went through that period and through the transition to Reagan. But the pace of change, I believe, is so different today that the old measures may not apply. And when we talk about a transformational presidency, I do think, and go to your question, that not only is this perhaps a transformational time for Obama and for the presidency, but it's occurring at a transformational time in the media, and they are intertwined. And the way Barack Obama's presidency is going to be perceived will largely be because of the way the media will carry those messages forward. And it's a very different media environment than we have, that any of us have seen in our lifetimes, and perhaps really in the history of the country. And there are interesting already examples to draw from. For instance, I really thought of the Obama campaign as the first post-internet campaign, post-internet in the sense that the internet was, there's no such thing as the new media anymore, because the new media is now just the media. It's not new. We're used to the internet. This was a candidacy that used the internet in the same way that a generation before would use what we thought then of what we regard now as the old media or the mainstream media. The way he communicated with supporters, the way he gathered resources to run was new, and it led directly to his success. He's really the first presidential candidate who didn't need a political party to get him where he was. He basically snubbed the Democratic Party. Not that he didn't agree with the philosophy, but he didn't rely on the party's traditional methods of putting together groups, and then those groups would vet and then give him the resources. He didn't rely really even on the mainstream media as much as, and I would agree, the mainstream media was fascinated with Barack Obama, not because he tended to be philosophically attuned to where many in the media are individually, but because he was a great story, and reporters love a great story. They love a great story whether somebody is on the right or whether they're on the left, and he was the best story of the campaign. But he didn't even need that, because he built a base using the technology that no one else had used before, maybe Howard Dean in a little way. But he put together, again, his resources came by using the internet, raising a little bit of money from thousands and thousands of people, and he learned to communicate directly with supporters and potential supporters through the web, and he didn't have to go through the mainstream media. And mainstream media at several points during the campaign declared him dead. Of course, initially, the mainstream media said he was dead because he could certainly not beat Hillary. But he obviously defied that. So I thought a turning point for me where we can say the old media is no longer relevant, and there is a different media now, I won't say the new media, when he announced his vice presidential selection. There was no press conference. He didn't go on Letterman or Leno. He said, if you want to know who my vice presidential choice is going to be, send me your cell phone number and I'll send you a text message. And that's what he did. And the world learned about Joe Biden in a text message. The world, even the media that was covering him and spending tens and thousands of dollars to cover him every day, they learned about it in a text message. Where are those cell phone numbers today? You can bet he didn't leave them behind at Democratic headquarters. They have them at the White House, and when Barack Obama needs to draw on support, he can use levers that that no one else ever had. No one was able to take advantage of. I don't want to overstate this for Ken and Jerry, but I think one of the most frustrating jobs to have in Washington today may be to be in the White House press corps, because he doesn't need you anymore. And he needs you for window dressing because he needs to have a press conference and call on people, and he uses that stage very well. But when when we were just children, Ken, and covering the White House press corps was a fantastic job because the president needed to go through you to get his message out, through us. And so what we did was we felt was really important. We were going to be the megaphone in some ways, but he doesn't need us anymore, and that's a little bit of a frightening thought. But how he shapes his presidency using the new media tools available, I think, are going to be fascinating to watch, and in many ways will shape the success of his presidency.
Can I make a short point about that?
Sure.
I think that's a really good point Tom made, and again, there are historical parallels here. Andrew Jackson became president in part because Martin Van Buren built this huge network of newspapers, fairly cheap newspapers, so-called penny papers at the time, which really backed a much more democratic idea of politics. And so even though Jackson was very different from Obama, he would have never thought of giving a press conference, nevertheless, he was born by the support of working people, working men especially, who were buying these newspapers, which were very much partisan papers at the time, which really didn't exist before the 1820s. And another example, of course, is FDR himself, who was the first president to go on the radio on a regular basis and whose voice was perfect for the radio. The fireside chats, people think about them all the time, but we forget that the radio was not a new medium in the 30s, but it really was, for the first time, a really popular medium. Everyone had access to a radio in the 30s. That wasn't true in the 20s. If you ever heard Herbert Hoover's voice compared to Franklin D. Roosevelt's, well, there's no comparison. And, somewhat like John McCain and the Internet compared to Barack Obama and the Internet. So there's a parallel here as well.
Well, and just pick up that point, because it's an excellent one. With John F. Kennedy and his presidency, his election to the presidency depended on his ability to use television. It played to his strength so well. And Ronald Reagan's success was also because he could use what was the dominant media of the time. So how, again, with Barack Obama, how he uses what today's media allows him to do is going to define, again, I think, what his presidency does.
I mean, I think he's using new media, obviously, but he's also using the bully pulpit. He's also using traditional ways to reach out, as he did this week in a speech. In his speech at Georgetown this week, he said he addressed his critics on a number of points, and he said he's been accused of pushing a liberal social agenda while mortgaging our children's future, which is, of course, the mainline Republican argument against him. Critics charge he and the Democrats are presiding over a huge escalation of government and have bandied about the word socialism. Obviously, Democrats want to seize this moment. There's a lot of pent-up desire. What do you, Ken and Jerry, think about that? Is it fair to throw the word socialism around? Is it fair to say this is a major change?
Yeah, well, I think it's definitely a major change. I think the part of the subtext of this is that, as we saw with the tax protests and other things, the Republicans and the conservatives are trying to get some traction on something. you see, there was a rash of stories in the last week about Obama being polarizing. And he is polarizing in the sense that he has virtually no support in the core of the Republican Party, but enormous support in the Democratic Party and strong support among independents in the middle. But the Republican Party has contracted, and that's a big change because it's no longer a 50-50 nation. The Republican Party, I think like a quarter of the country now identifies itself as Republican. That's a very much smaller than it used to be. So that's one thing. The other is that I think people understand that people have a lot more patience with the economy issue than we might have expected. And so when terms like socialism are thrown out, I think people are less impressed with the rhetoric and the negative terminology than is what he's doing going to work. And that's the big factor which we don't know the answer to. You've seen him pivot this week toward being more optimistic, looking for signs that things are getting better. The White House now tells us every little tiny piece of positive news. The 2000th Obama-funded transportation project has gotten its money. Not that it started, it's just gotten its money. So they're looking for every little, as he said, glimmer of hope. And you're going to see that more and more as the weeks go on. But I think that if you look at polls and you look at sort of anecdotal evidence, people, I think, are a lot more willing to give him a chance, give him the benefit of the doubt, and see if what he's doing works. And so the criticisms of that he's a socialist or too much government, I think there's some volatility in that polling, but I think basically people feel like this is a very serious time we're in, and let's see if the new guy can fix things. And they're going to give him some time.
Well, I kind of think people need to get their terminology straight here. We're talking about big government, yeah, absolutely, and we're talking about spending a lot of money. We're definitely talking about activism, but I don't think we're talking about socialism. If you were a socialist, you would have wanted Barack Obama. Let's just think about two things he didn't do that he could have done. People would have wanted him to nationalize banks as opposed to prop them up. He didn't do that, and there were plenty of people on the right and left who thought he was going to do that. And you would want him to propose a national health insurance plan with a single payer being the federal government, which half of the Democratic caucus in the House wants, and he hasn't done that either. And so I think it's big government, but it's not socialism. And I think when people throw the terms around, they haven't thought them through very carefully because they're different things. And you can be for or against one or the other, but I don't think they ought to be confused with each other. And so I think you have a kind of a new model emerging here that has a lot to do with government activism and has a lot to do with spending taxpayers' money, but not in the traditional, socialist mode that people actually think about when they use that term. I think it's necessary to redefine the terms or to come up with some new ones for what we're seeing here, but I don't think socialist is it.
You mentioned, I'd like to talk about health care. You mentioned that he hasn't proposed a single-payer system, but I must say I'm not sure what he's going to propose.
Well, they're not sure either. It's interesting what's happening on health care, and for purposes of this conversation, I think it's instructive. First of all, they don't want to write a health care bill. They want Congress to write a health care bill that they'll play off of. That's the first big difference from Hillary care. Secondly, they sense, and I think they're probably right, that what Americans are worried about in health care now has changed in the last 10 years. That it is no longer worry about 47 million uninsured Americans. That's the top of the list. It's the concern about the cost of health care for everybody, including people who do have health insurance. And if you aren't talking about containing costs somehow, you've missed the boat politically on health care. So I think that's a very big thing. And the third thing is that the predicate for whatever they do is going to be that if you like the health care you have now, we'll ensure that you get to keep it. And that's a long way from a single-payer health care system, rip it all out and rewire the system. So you put all those things together, you're going to get a little bit of a hybrid in which there will be a government-guaranteed program that everybody can get into, I'm guessing, but not government health insurance. And by the way, if you don't convince people that whatever you do is going to hold down the costs for everybody, you will have failed.
There's another interesting dynamic on health care, and that's one advantage that Obama feels that he has now. And if you talk to these people long enough, you get the feeling that they think the stars are aligning for them in many, many ways on many issues, is that when the Hillary Care, Bill Clinton program came out, it was invested with this notion of a moral issue. We have to take care of whoever it was at the time, 35 million uninsured. Now it's much higher than that. now, as Jerry said, it's a practical issue and a moral issue, and that they feel gives them a tremendously better opportunity to get this through, because they're tying it to the whole economy, to business, to individual families needing some break from the costs. So that they feel that's a tremendous advantage. It's not just a moral issue now, it's also a practical one, and that they feel gives them a tremendous opportunity.
He talked this week about how, addressing his critics, about how fixing health care will help the deficit by slowing the cost of entitlements. I'm interested in, will health care be done like the stimulus without Republicans? And also I can ask you guys that, and then also maybe you can weigh in on other presidents who've sort of jumped over the opposition party and.
Well, I don't honestly know the answer. I think you've asked the key question on health care, and I don't know the answer. You know, they have arranged to handle health care through reconciliation, the budget mechanism that allows them to avoid filibusters, which gives them the ticket to do it with 51 Democratic votes in the Senate. So maybe, but having talked to people who are deeply involved in this in Congress, I don't think they want to do it that way. I think they want to figure out a way to make health care bipartisan, which doesn't mean they'll succeed. But the two things that scare them are that it's something this big, you want co-ownership. You want somebody else along for the ride and to take the bumps along with you, so it's not Democrats only. And second, and this goes to what Ken was just saying, I think they believe there's actually a consensus now that something needs to be done. Businesses are as unhappy with the health care system as their workers are, as are the people who don't have health insurance at all. So everybody may just be ready to get along for the ride here. And that's, I think, for the people in Congress who are going to write this bill and push it through, that's clearly the goal at this point, not to say, as they did, I think, in the stimulus, don't need them.
Right.
Yeah, I think the point that was made about the practicality of healthcare now and how people are speaking much less about the uninsured is an important one. In many ways, I think you can see Democrats now and Obama as their leader as their main agenda is to protect the security of the middle class rather than help those who are not in the middle class. I mean, I think Obama wants to do the latter as well, but clearly the thrust of the policy, both in terms of shoring up the banks and making people feel better about investing in the stock market, consuming more and so forth, it's all about the middle class. In fact, of course, when he set up this task force under Biden's office on wage inequality and so forth. It was talked about as a task force on the middle class, not the working class. And in retrospect, it's kind of interesting. You know, and the New Deal was really in many ways about building a middle class in America, because most Americans could not be defined and would not have defined themselves as part of the middle class at that time. They were farmers, small farmers, they were workers, sharecroppers. A lot of recent immigrants had very hard, dirty jobs, often walked to work, you know, barefoot in the summer because they didn't want to wear out their good shoes that they used to go to church. And that succeeded to a large degree. And the 60s, in some ways, the Great Society was about expanding the middle class, including African Americans, especially Mexican Americans and Puerto Rican Americans to a degree as well. But now I think the agenda for Obama is to protect the security of people who already consider themselves middle class, and that leads into much more practical kinds of rhetoric and practical kinds of programs as well. I just want to make one point about socialism, which is interesting. There was a poll some people probably saw Rasmussen did about a week ago or so. I've never seen a poll like this before, which itself is an indication of what's going on in the country. Americans were asked, do you support capitalism or do you support socialism? I don't think there's ever been a poll like this, not that I remember anyway. And surprisingly, about 22% of Americans said they supported socialism. And among Americans under 30, it was pretty close, 39 to 36%, something like that, with the rest undecided. And the poor Americans were more in favor of socialism than the richer ones. So I'm not sure Americans know what socialism is, but if Barack Obama is being called a socialist, a lot of
I want to talk a little bit, and I want to ask Tom about this. So much of, I think, presidents are obviously buffeted by the world and national events which they face during their time in office. But they also are very much defined by their personality and their psyche. And everyone who has met Barack Obama and covered him talks about his charisma, his calm. He was Mike Fletcher, who was going to be joining us on this panel, and Ken very, very graciously agreed to fill in for him, talked about how he was a cautious candidate, but he's not a cautious president. And he's so confident, so cool. Polls show that Obama is more popular than some of his policies, like Reagan, I think, which is a president he studied. Polls also show that a majority of Americans are worried about the debt the stimulus will cause, but they had confidence in Barack Obama. And I just wonder, Tom, what you think about that and how much that defines his presidency.
I think it defined his candidacy and will define his presidency in the same way. The no drama Obama is the line that attaches to him, and that's both who he is and that's the message that he has sent to his administration. That's how he wants things to be run. He wants to be seen as someone who always has things under control. And that becomes critical in setting the mood for the American public. If for instance, going back to predates most of you in the room, but probably the point where Jimmy Carter's presidency was seen as failing was when he went on television, and it was in the middle of an energy crisis at that point. The price of gasoline was rising at what we thought were outrageous levels. It actually topped $1 in those days. There were huge gas lines. He rationed gasoline, would give out tickets, and you could only buy gasoline on certain days of the week depending on what your license plate said. Inflation was running in the high double digits. And in any event, things were rapidly falling apart for him, and he went on television and wearing a cardigan sweater and basically delivered what came to be called the malaise speech. He never used that word, but he said basically to the American public, you're all in a funk and get over it, was sort of the message that seemed to come across. And that mood, that enraged the public at that time to essentially be told that you're feeling badly and it's your fault. But it also, I think, told people that this guy isn't the one that we want to sound the trumpet and lead us out. And one of the things that Ronald Reagan was able to do was show that supreme confidence, almost a swagger that America is a great country and we're not going to accept this kind of thing. And there was a hostage crisis, of course, that weighed down Jimmy Carter. And fortunately for Ronald Reagan, the hostages in Iran were released on the day that Ronald Reagan raised his hand and took the oath. So, but I think by and large, Ronald Reagan just had evoked a sense that everything is fine. We are a great people. You can relax, and I can even take a nap in the afternoon, and things won't go badly, because he just seemed to be very comfortable. That's exactly what I think Barack Obama is doing here. He has a sense of calmness about him, and yet there's a lot of activity, a lot of motion. With George Bush, he had that I think very self-conscious swagger. He tried to show, I'm the president, and he would walk out there as if he was in the movie set. He was Glenn Ford at high noon, and he was going to draw at any second on you. But it looked phony. And there's nothing phony about when Barack Obama just simply walks up to a microphone. He looks like an athlete. And that he looks like, I know how to be here. I want the ball when there's 1 second left and we're down by a point. That's the sort of thing that he shows, and I think that that means a lot to the American public, because the public will never follow the details. They'll never know what's in a health care package. They don't know what's in the stimulus bill. Most Americans don't know what stimulus means, beyond sexual connotations, probably. So, but...
students know that.
Right, oh, sorry. In any event, I think that setting that tone through your physicality is critically important.
I'd like to ask each of the panelists quickly to say what you think the biggest pitfalls Barack Obama faces, biggest potential pitfalls.
Well, two come to mind. One is, and I think this is an underrated danger, that the political will to finish the economic rescue, whatever you want to call it, will fizzle out before the job is done. And I think the particular manifestation of that, which I mentioned earlier, may be that if the president had to go to Congress now, and I suspect any time in the next few months has to go to Congress to ask for more money to finish the bank bailouts, I think the political fatigue on the bailout front is so large that even a popular president with a party in control of both houses would have a hard time doing that. So I think that's the one danger. The second danger, which it started to come into focus a little bit more in the last couple of weeks, I think, is that some foreign calamity emerges to knock the house of cards down before it's been really reinforced. That is to say, a terrorist attack, an Iranian nuclear advance, a North Korean act of craziness, and this is the one I worry about the most, a total meltdown in Pakistan, a nuclear-armed Islamic State. That sort of thing just comes out of the left field bleachers and messes up the game before it's completed.
I think those are very good points. Just to add to the discussion some other thoughts. One, I think, is the idea of over-reliance on this best and brightest notion, that he's got these brilliant people around him, the Geithners, the Summerses, and so on, and that they're wrong. And now, how does the president know that? Well, this is a big gamble. In a lot of ways, what he's doing is very risky, huge amounts of debt. The country is very worried about that, but so far the people are more worried about their jobs, retirement, and homes, so they're willing to swallow the debt notion. But I think it's the idea that the experts he surrounded himself, he might rely on too much, and we've heard that best and brightest in the context of Vietnam. It's possible that he's in that syndrome again. The other is just the isolation that a president feels. It's related to the first point. This has always been something I've been very interested in covering the presidents. How do they remain in touch with everyday America? So far, and it's only been, 86 days, he's managed to seem to do that, but it gets tougher and tougher as the days go on. Because there is a bubble at the White House, and how does the president understand what the country is really thinking, what the country's going through? It's very tough. And Obama, among the things he does, is he tries to keep in touch with popular culture, which President Bush almost never did. That's just a fact. And the whole notion that he went on the Leno show, we've seen that in the context of people saying, well, was he diminishing the presidency by going on this late-night comedian show? But it's part of what Tom was saying. They feel that the media environment and the way to communicate the country is very fractured, so they've got to do a lot of different things. They're not ignoring the mainstream media, by the way, especially in contrast with President Bush. This is actually a good environment to cover the White House in, because for the mainstream media, because we're part of the whole picture of them trying to get their word out. So if they understand what your market is, they understand all this, and they'll deal with it. Plus, they're putting the principals out to talk to us in the media. The Bush people didn't want to do that. What they tried to do is drive their information flow through the public relations apparatus. So if you wanted to talk to the chief of staff or the national security advisor, it was very tough to do. They wanted to drive it through their communications people. Obama's not doing it that way. You can get to see the Rahm Emanuels and the David Axelrods and the Jim Joneses. That's a big change, and that's a positive in covering the White House. But I think this isolation is a big problem that every president has, and that's one thing that I wonder about.
Thank you.
hard to pick one. But I think the world is a problem for him. Not just in terms of Afghanistan and Pakistan and Iran and North Korea, which are serious enough, but as we know, this is not just an American recession, it's a world recession. And in the first 100 days that FDR had, he basically operated as if the rest of the world didn't really exist. I mean, it was all about the United States, all about American banks, all about American farmers, all about American the stock market in this country. But as we know, if China decided to pull their money out of the United States today or tomorrow, at least a lot of it, we'd be in a lot more serious trouble than we already are. And the Chinese economy is already slowing some. The Indian economy is evidently slowing some. And so you can't solve the economic problems of the United States anymore only in the United States. It's impossible. One can argue it was always impossible, but it's really impossible now, and everyone knows that. The stock market's all over the world. People wake up and they turn on their computers and they see, how the DAX do and how the, Asian stock markets do and so forth, and all that matters. So that's a problem because he can't do it himself. He, in some ways, is president of the world, and yet he's not really. There's still a lot of sovereignty out there, And finally, the other question is, I think healthcare is central. I mean, every transformative president has a program that he can point to when he runs for re-election, that historians point to, their opponents don't want to bring up because they know it's popular. Roosevelt had Social Security primarily, and others as well. Johnson, of course, had anti-poverty and then the Voting Rights Act, which were transformative, and Medicare transformative, but except for Medicare, were not popular among a lot of middle-class white Americans. Reagan had tax cuts, and luckily also being able to argue that he was pushing the Russians back finally and winning the Cold War. Obama needs something besides helping the economy get on a better footing. He needs to say, we have changed America's lives for the better. We have covered Americans in a way they were not covered before. We've provided security to the middle class. And without the health care bill, some kind of health care bill, I'm not sure how he does that.
Would you like to weigh in, Tom?
I would only go back. I think I agree with that, and it goes back to what Jerry's point was earlier, that the speech at Georgetown earlier this week does pull all of those pieces together into a coherent whole, and it was his way of saying, here is the larger picture, the frame in which everything else is going to go. And so from this point on, I think people will have a better understanding that he's not just throwing a program out here, doing a Band-Aid over here and so forth. There's something, all of these pieces come together. It was a very smart thing for him to have done. Again, I'll take Ken's point there. I shouldn't have suggested that the White House press corps is not relevant at all. It still commands the largest single audience in the country, and in order for Barack Obama's policies to succeed, he has to put together a governing coalition, and that coalition is still going to be assembled largely because of the mainstream media. So it's critical that he use all of those tools.
I'd like to end, I think, my questions of the panel, and then we'll open it up for some questions from the audience, so you can be thinking about what you'd like to ask the panel. I'd like to end a little bit with the media and with something the president said this week at his speech. And it's a question about whether or not the idea of the 100 days is, I guess, an invention of the media, I think you'd have to say. And so I am curious about whether or not it's too soon to tell what kind of presidency this will be based on 86 or 100 days. Obama chided the media a bit. It's not something he shies away from. He said, when a crisis hits, there is all too often a lurch from shock to trance, with everyone responding to the tempest of the moment until the furor has died down and the media coverage has moved on to something else, instead of confronting the major challenges that will shape our future in a sustained and focused way. In other words, I think he accused the media of having a short attention span. So I just wonder what each of you thinks about that. Jerry?
Oh, I have a much longer attention span than Ken. I think he should go first. So.
I'm not listening to you right now.
It's right. It's always been true. Whether it's relevant or not, I'm not really sure. I think to say that is both to say the truth, but also to pretend that the press should somehow do the job of the White House with the bully pulpit, which is to keep people's attention focused on the problem. And that's, I think, the issue right now. And that's why the president gave the speech, and that's why I think, as Tom said, it was a good idea. I think the potential here is for people to get fatigue, as I said, and I think that their job is to make sure that people understand there's a long haul as well as a short term. Is the media helpful? I don't know. I mean, I suggest the mainstream media is more likely to maintain a long-term fix than bloggers and the new media are. And I think they sense that, and they're going to use that as best they can. But that's partly our job, but that's also partly the job of the political leadership of the country. And I'd be as worried about Congress, by the way, as the media in that regard.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the 100 days is as we started off saying, an artificial yardstick in many ways. But a good president and a good communicator, a savvy White House will understand the hand that they're dealt, and they're already getting ready for this 100-day rash of stories. They're putting people out privately for the stories that they're anticipating. So I think that's a smart thing for them to do. Understand that no matter whether they like this premise or not, they're going to have to deal with it, and they'll probably deal with it rather well. I think the other thing is that they do understand the nature of what they're dealing with in the media, Robert Gibbs, the press secretary, has become a javelin catcher, which press secretaries often do day to day, just sort of allowing essentially the network correspondents to ask as many questions, follow-ups, et cetera, as they want over and over again, just to satisfy this, I guess it's 9 television operations there, the cable stations, the broadcast networks, and so on, and the wire services. But they are feeding the beast, we're the beast in the media, in private ways, which, as I said before, the Bush people did not do very well, especially in the second term. And I think they suffered because Bush became even more of a cardboard cutout and a caricature because they never explained the private Bush, which, to be fair, was probably a lot more positive than the sense of the public Bush that he was left with at the end. Obama's people are not doing that. They're feeding the beast, as I say, a lot more. So I think you'll see with the 100-day premise in another week or two, they're going to be out very aggressively trying to shape those stories.
I think there's a reason why it's called news. Obviously, what is fresh and sometimes and provocative, controversial is more interesting to cover and more interesting to most people who read it. I couldn't help but think that what a brilliant idea that was. Now I know it was the kids did want a dog, but I have a daughter who's a senior in high school, and all the kids in her class, and there were a lot of smart kids. They don't know much about the stimulus plan, but they all know about the dog. And again, this humanizes him. And he kept doing things. This Obama kept doing things which were like that. I remember the 3-point shot when he was in Kuwait during the campaign. He has a wonderful, and he and his people obviously have a wonderful knack of finding every once in a while these sort of human interest anecdotes or episodes which are keep reminding people that they really like this guy and like his family and everything else, and that's critical too. We haven't talked enough about that. I'm amazed, actually, just parenthetically, how few stories there have been about race in the last 87 days, and I think that will be true going forward too. As an historian, that continues to amaze me. That no, we haven't got beyond race, obviously, but the same time, at the top levels of society, if someone who's black manages to get there, pretty quickly we do forget about race, or at least we fold it into our appreciation or lack of appreciation of the person. It's not a separate question anymore.
Short attention span. I was forgetting what the question was when you started talking about the dog. I think I think we do. The media does have a terrible tendency to. We're guilty of what President Obama was saying. We just rush after the latest, what we think is going to be the hot topic, and then the next day something else, and we leave whatever we did and rush somewhere else. Politico, which really distinguished itself during this campaign cycle, the newspaper of the digital age in many ways, but I just read the other day that their mission statement is that we want to own the morning and then we want to own the afternoon. So, meaning the news of the day. They see morning and afternoon as very separate news cycles, which I think, and they're probably right, that the people who are constantly fixated on what's happening in government will be focused on something different at several times during the day. The problem with this, and it's one of the reasons why I really lament what's happening with as the newspaper habit slips away from us as a country, is that the internet and really the electronic media doesn't lend itself to modulation, to respond to some development in a way that's proportional to the way you ought to respond. I think of it as, with a fire in the old days, you had everything from a 1-alarm fire to the 10-alarm fire, and they knew exactly how many units should really respond depending on the nature of the blaze. So, but with the internet and the blogosphere, particularly, everything, every day, the latest thing is a 10-alarm fire. It's all they're going to focus on for that time. And then when the next cycle comes and there's something else, that's the 10-alarm fire of the day, regardless of whether, in the larger context of the world and the policy, it shouldn't be worth a blip. I mean, yesterday was the Tea Party Day. This is a faux news event that was created supposedly by the independent bloggers in the media without help. Well, we know that's phony, that Fox News made this sort of a promotional event for themselves and they sent their celebrities out to drum up the crowds. But nonetheless, that was the news of the day yesterday. If you went to then it was, maybe altogether 10,000 people across the country participated in this, a blip. But we've lost proportionality, and I think that is a challenge that the president has to be able to handle. And when he made that comment, he was expressing his frustration at this issue, because if you're going to be president, there are some long-term, very serious issues that aren't going to go away day to day. It's going to be Pakistan, it's going to be Iran, and whether we have a stable relationship with them. And we don't make it easy for the American public to stay focused on that.
Great. Well, now let me throw it open to questions. I'm sure we've got some. Tate, one of my students, maybe if you could stand when you ask a question, that would be great.
Sure. Everybody spoke about how...
Why don't you wait for the mic?
Oh, and we have a mic, so...
Everybody... Everybody spoke about how important it is for the staff to humanize the president. I'm wondering if you think the press has gone overboard on those stories, treating the president and his staff at times as celebrity, following their personal lives and such.
I mean, I think presidents have been celebrities for a long time. This is not that new, and it's in some ways the nature of the office, because the president is the head of state and the head of the government, and sort of an elected monarch. And I mean, perhaps being a historian, I'm a little cynical about how new everything often seems to some people in the media, but I I don't think this is unusual. 1944 campaign, the press fixated on this story about Franklin D. Roosevelt's little dog Fala and whether Fala was transported on a government plane or not at public expense, and the Republicans tried to make a big deal of this. And this dominated news coverage for a few days.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
Well, it's interesting just talking about it here. Look at the history of dogs in the presidency. Fowler, Checkers, remember Checkers? Buddy, Clinton's dog. It goes on, and it's just sort of people invest in it a larger sort of narrative. But I think, the president is a celebrity, and the Obama people understand that, and they'll capitalize on it. And we partly do that in the media, make these people celebrities. We're in the celebrity culture. People are interested in this. And I don't know how many of you have seen this YouTube of Susan Boyle, the British singer, the woman who just emerged at this fantastic voice, this sort of incredible moment for her and for so many people around the world. But this is an example. So people look at these things as almost sort of unifying moments, and anybody who's seen that video, it is a very positive, uplifting thing to see how all this worked out for her. But it's just an example of the celebrity culture, and people just want this sort of thing, whether it's inspiration or drawing a larger lesson that they can put in their own lives, and that's what good presidents understand and capitalize on.
I think Barack Obama, Jerry, maybe you can weigh in on this. He was a celebrity in his first year as a senator, as a freshman senator, wasn't he?
Well, he was a celebrity because of a speech at the Democratic National Convention before he was even a senator. And that was a moment, and people get moments, and some people capitalize on their moments, and some people don't. He happens to have capitalized on it. But there was also something compelling, and this is a very, I think, uniquely American, or at least it's certainly an American phenomenon. There was a personal story, a narrative of his life that captivated people, and I think that's different than somebody who grew up in my hometown of Hays, Kansas, doesn't have the same sort of intriguing. I admit it, doesn't have the same sort of intriguing narrative that a person with this kind of background, which people have never seen before. So there is a certain uniquely Obama part of this phenomenon that we're talking about.
We have a question from Wilson.
Yeah, I'm Don Wolfensberger with the Congress Project here at the Wilson Center. During the speech, I believe it was the Georgetown speech, Obama, someone calculated, mentioned new foundation 4 times, sort of laying a new foundation through his programs. Other presidents have been content, I guess, with new deals and fair deals and square deals and new frontiers. And I guess Bill Clinton even tried the new covenant, but that didn't go anywhere. But I'm just wondering, it didn't seem to make it clear what of the old foundation is being thrown out. I think most Americans think that our foundation is our constitutional form of government, our capitalist, the social welfare state or whatever. But what is going to be, I guess, deleted as this new foundation is being built?
You're the historian.
I think, he doesn't want to call himself a liberal, but I think he's a liberal. But what that means, I think, it won't be a new foundation so much as bringing back some of the construction of the old. I'm trying to avoid stumbling on my metaphors here. I think that clearly there's going to be more corporate regulation. There's going to be a lot more oversight of the auto industry. There already is. He, in effect, fired the CEO of General Motors, which is pretty amazing. And there'll be some sort of healthcare bill, but it's not going to be a radical change. I made fun of the socialism charge before, and I think it needs to be made fun of. In many ways, if you look at left-wing blogs, look at The Nation magazine. The people are very, people who are really on the left in this country aren't so sure about him. They want him to be more left-wing than he is, and they realize he's not going to be because that's not the politics of the country right now or probably ever. So one thing is pretty sure, I don't think that term, the new foundation, is going to make it. Gail Collins already makes fun of it today in her column in the New York Times. It sounds like you're fixing up your basement or something.
I think we have a question down front here.
I'm a Fulbright scholar from Ukraine, and My name is Viktor Pasesnichenko, and I apologize, but in order to ask the question, I'd like to make some comments. I appreciate the panel, and I have a strong feeling that I have passed through the things that you are talking about. I mean the Ukrainian Orange Revolution 5 years ago. Certainly, there are some particularities, but the things you've been talking about are so similar to the things we've been experiencing. For example, we've started from a great need for changes, great expectations and hopes, and all these caused the Orange Revolution. Then we've started to calculate how our expectations are going to be practiced, like 100 days, etc. Then we strangely have found that our president don't need us, absolutely. Then we have found him that he is isolated. He is like a father. He is talking about Ukrainians as my nation. We are kids, and he is a father. And he is talking also in not so very much democratic discourse. And then all this ended in a great disappointment, and the president having only a few percentage left of his greatest support. So it's up to you to consider whether there are so many similarities or particularities. But in general, I guess that there are two factors. One is human factor. Our president proved to be old-fashioned political figure, as the majority of Ukrainian politicians. Whether the Obama will be a politician of new generation, let us believe. We'll see. But there is a second objective factor of such dramatic outcomes. I guess no human being in a position of U.S. president could meet the challenges that America is facing right now. So I guess you should be preparing yourself that there will be a failure, and there will be a disappointment.
Do you have a question for the panel?
And the problem is for your failure and your disappointment not to be so deep and dramatic as in Ukraine. So it seems to me it's very important for the public not to go for Obama into isolation. I would propose you to create a social movement for our Obama in order not to give the Obama opportunity to be isolated and to be going the way that our Ukrainian president unfortunately went. So it's kind of, it's maybe not so a question, but a kind of reflection, and I would appreciate your opinions.
I'll mention that a little bit. I think that what you may be talking about, at least what I'm drawing from that, is a cult of personality. Whenever you have a leader that becomes a personality, so that people look to him a cult-like figure, almost always those end badly, often end violently, because there are going to be, as you say, some points where there is going to be a failure. And the higher you are on that pedestal, then the again, more dramatic the fall will be. And it really does get back to managing expectations. And it's going to be very important that President Obama not allow himself to become a cult figure in many ways, that he try to reject this celebrity status that he has, and I think he often walks on the edge of that. He's got to be careful of that. He has said, and again going back to the Georgetown speech, he wanted to try to put the balance out there that I have a plan, I'm confident in the plan, I think that we have found that things are going to be better, but that there will still be problems, people will still lose their jobs. He was trying to find that right balance, but I think your point is a very good one. So much hope has been invested by so many people in Obama at a difficult time that if that hope is dashed in any ways, it will end very, very badly for the American public, because then I think the seeds of dramatic change are going to be there. So there's a good lesson for us.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Tom. I think after the headiness of the campaign and Inauguration Day, we all remember Inauguration Day, I was just struck with, I wonder if these hundreds of thousands of people are going to hang in there and follow policy and be patient. And, governing is a lot tougher, so it's a lot more complex and tougher. We have a question for one of my students, Kurt.
Okay. My question is, you guys talked a lot about Obama, but I wanted to know what you thought about the real ruler of the White House, Michelle Obama, and her first 100 days.
Well, who wants to weigh in on that?
Yeah, well, I wrote about her the other day. Look at where she was a year ago and where she is now. Remember, she had the remarks about not being proud to be an American, which the staff then immediately said she didn't mean that. She meant she wasn't proud of the political system, and then she was. So it's a very negative moment for her, and her approval was about 30%. Now her approval is higher than her husband's. It's up close to 70% in some polls. And what's happened is, partly it's as people got to know her, they like her more. That often happens with first ladies. But also, she's made some very savvy moves. And as another historian told me in looking at Michelle Obama, you can be shrewd and sincere at the same time. And I think that's the combination she's bringing, this focus on, in addition to the daughters, which is a fabulous positive for her, that they see her as this wonderful mother, the public does. This notion of focusing on military families is a terrific thing for her to be doing, given the history of Democrats and the military and her husband and that sort of thing. And she does appear to be very genuine about it. So I think that she's selected issues very smartly, and she's, as first ladies always do these days, trying to find that balance between what we think of as a traditional first lady, the supporter of the husband, and a woman in her own right, which Michelle Obama certainly is as an accomplished lawyer. And so far, as I think you're suggesting, she's not the real power at the White House, but she's a very important player there. So,
I think we have a question in the back.
My name is Marie-Paul Rouleau. I'm working for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. I have two questions. The first is, as a Canadian, it always strikes me to hear President Obama, who always have a moral lesson in his speech. He always referred to the fact that the American lost their sense of responsibility. So I was wondering if it's something that strikes you, does it influence the American public? And the second question is about his age. He's 47. Does it mark in any way his first 100 days?
On the moral question, a majority of Americans, close to majority of Americans are still Protestant. Majority of Americans are still Protestant, but that won't be true in about 20 years probably. But I think our political culture is still very much influenced by Protestantism, by a sense of a moral calling, a sense that America is supposed to be the light unto the world, and a sort of messianic quality which you can trace back to the Puritans, which Canadians don't have. I mean, some Canadians have it. Some Scotch Presbyterians probably had it at one point. Quebecois people don't have it as much. Very different religion, very different history, of course. So I think, we're in the Woodrow Wilson Center here, and Woodrow Wilson is a perfect example of politics as moralism. And among other things. So, yeah, I think he's in that grand tradition.
His age?
Pardon?
His age? Anyone want to weigh in on his age? He's young and vital and vigorous, obviously.
Right, yeah.
He's an exercise fiend, obviously.
Yes, yeah. Well, I mean, part of it is that Kennedy notion of this young, vigorous leader coming in and changing things and have young kids, and it's not just the chronological age, but the whole atmosphere of the White House is much different now. President Bush didn't have daughters as young as Malia and Sasha, and President Kennedy did. And so you have that whole notion of young family, trying to invest some normalcy in the lives of the daughters, which is always a challenge. So I don't think it's so much that the age, although in the campaign there was this notion that he was too young and inexperienced to be president. I think that notion is, some people still feel that way, but I think most Americans think he's past that threshold, that he's not too young. So.
Just parenthetically, I was just thinking, how old Franklin Roosevelt was when he took office, 1933? He was only 51. He wasn't that much older than Obama, but we think of him as an almost grandfatherly figure.
Well, 70 is the new 40 or whatever. We have a question here.
Stine Dragsted, I'm with a Danish journalist. Just to say that if Obama was elected in Denmark or Sweden, he would not be called a socialist at all. So it's a very different concept we have of that. But I wanted to touch on his very different style when it comes to being an intellectual. Surrounding himself with very smart people and being very open about it. You touched on the best and the brightest, and whether that might be a syndrome he will experience. And you've written a book about the populist persuasion and how the left needed to learn a more populist rhetoric in terms to get this kind of election that Obama did. Did he succeed in that, or did he succeed in persuading Americans that you can be clever and smart? And a president is the anti-intellectual kind of tradition in American history that has been there, even though it might be a populist rhetoric. Is it gone now?
Well, I think at this point, I think he benefits from the sense that there was a lack of intellectual vigor in the Bush administration. And you may or may not think that's fair, but I think that's an accurate description of the American mindset. So for now, I think he has avoided that, but I think you touch on a danger for him, which is there is a kind of a populist tiger let loose in the land here, thanks to Goldman Sachs and AIG bailouts and bonuses and all that sort of thing, that he has to be wary of. And Roosevelt figured out, I defer to the real historian on the panel, but I think Franklin Roosevelt figured out how to use the populist anger to his benefit. And it is, to some extent, an anti-intellectual, certainly anti-East Coast, anti-New York, anti-establishment anger. I still think there's potential for that to consume part of the Obama agenda if he's not careful. So I guess my answer is, as of now, he's succeeded, but I think there's a cautionary note, in my mind at least, is within that snapshot of today.
Yeah, just to remind me, we've corresponded about this, I know, with emails. But I think that the regional populist tradition is not as strong as it was. It's really conservatives, Republicans will have to and are using with the Tea Parties and the like populist rhetoric and populist tropes and icons even from history to oppose Obama because that's what they have. That's part of the toolbox that has to be used. But the problem Republicans have using it, of course, is that they are identified, as Herbert Hoover was, as a party of big business. And so, on the one hand, I saw yesterday some of the posters in the teabag demonstrations. One says, we love capitalism. That's not usually a populist slogan. So it's mixed. About the intellectual question, it's an interesting one. I think I agree, with Jerry, that Bush was seen as the anti-intellectual, even though that's not really that fair, actually. He read a lot anyway, especially history. But clearly, Americans were ready for somebody who was more thoughtful, more reflective. You can be an intellectual and be passionate, and as people said, he's not that kind of intellectual. He's thoughtful, and I think that's appealing at a time of economic crisis.
Let me add one thought, which just occurred to me as Michael was talking. That it's important. It's instructive to look at the coalition that elected Barack Obama. You had upper-income Americans going heavily for him. You certainly had higher-educated Americans going heavily for him. You had a Republican vote that has moved downscale in terms of the economic ladder. There's a kind of a transformation happening here. People you would expect to vote Republican for economic reasons voted Democrat, and people you might expect to vote Democrat for economic reasons, for cultural reasons, voted Republican. So I think this picture is out of focus right now, and I don't know what it'll look like when it comes back into focus.
Yeah, just also the other thing is on this intellectualism business. He learned a lot in the campaign. That's one thing about Obama. He does learn, and that's a tremendous advantage for a president to have this ability to learn and respond. You remember the idea of the remark about him talking about how Americans in rural places are too wedded to their guns and religion. He goes to church every day, every Sunday now. He's makes a big deal of that. Ronald Reagan
to an Episcopal church.
And he's still shopping for another church. Ronald Reagan never went to church on Sunday. He never did, or very rarely did. And also, look at the basketball connection. I mean, this is another. He understands this notion of not going too far into the elite world. He had the ESPN to the White House to pick the Final Four very, very smartly, and that was a very, very smart decision on his part. So, that's all part of. He does learn, and I think he understands the perils of looking too much like an elitist.
I think Jerry's point is a really good one. The public is obviously willing to give him more than 100 days, but the question is, how long are they willing to give him? How patient will they be? He keeps prepping the public for this is a long slog. This is going to take us a long time to get out of this. So the question is, how long will the public?
As long as it's not later than November of 2010. I think there's a lot to that notion too.
I think we have a question there.
Masha Shifter Derzu, I'm from Embassy of Slovenia. I would like to have your opinion on how is his 100 days on foreign policy issues. Was he successful in Europe, Afghanistan, Pakistan, similar? And will he be successful with his environmental and green technology policies? Thank you.
I'm going to just pick up on, I think the overall answer to that is that he is getting high marks from leaders abroad for what he has done. And that comes, the point earlier, I think, Ken, that you made, that he is picking up exactly where Bill Clinton left off. He had in place a ready-to-go group of people who said to him, now this is where we're going to go. And, of course, with Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, he started off with a great deal of credibility and sure-footedness in foreign policy, and he also recognized he himself is much more comfortable abroad than most Americans are. The fact that he had lived abroad for a time, and who he is, the fact his father is a Kenyan. So both his personal temperament, maybe his DNA makes him comfortable dealing in that arena, and the fact that he had I think a solid staff of advisors who allowed him to or counseled him as to how to approach this. Plus, he is not George W. Bush. I think that alone was just a huge change. The expectation of change abroad was a big advantage for him, which he has used quite well. Even today, he's going to Mexico City, and then he's going to be going to Turks and Caicos for the summit in Latin America. He speaks very easily and with, seems to me, great deal of knowledge and understanding about countries that you really wouldn't expect of a president within his first 100 days. I think it's been quite successful.
I think we have time for one last question. And one of my journalism students can ask the last question.
Basically, we've kind of been talking about extending the 100 days, and my question has to do with the next hurdle in Obama's administration, which is immigration. How do you think he's going to confront immigration reform as Americans are hesitant to kind of send more money in the ways of ESL programs, maybe even creating a pathway for citizenship for children?
Well, I think that's not on the top of the list. I think that he's very well aware that he even though he's taking a lot of things, there's some things he just is going to overload the system. I think we've said healthcare is at the economy, healthcare at the top of the list. I think he will take on this global warming climate change issue, maybe through the EPA. That's a longer discussion. I think immigration is down the line. It's just, I think the system can't handle another huge issue like that, especially given to what happened to Bush's comprehensive immigration plan. So I don't think you're going to see much on that this year.
And considering the fact that his own party is very not together on the immigration question. I wouldn't go there. I'd worry more if I were him about free trade protectionism than immigration in the first year.
Well, I really want to thank all of you for coming. I think this has been a great panel, and I want to very much thank Jerry Seib, Ken Walsh, Michael Kazin, and Tom Fiedler. I think we brought a little light rather than heat to this issue, and maybe a little heat as well. And I really appreciate you participating. So thanks so much.